and I'm the chair of the Hong Kong Jewish Historical Society. And tonight we're discussing the remarkable life of Solomon Bard, and it's in conversation with Monica Bard, Paul Bard, and Kenneth Pomeranz. And they each offer a different perspective to his life. Kenneth is... Ken is a historian and professor at the University of Chicago and the curator of the current exhibition, which I'll talk about in a moment. We're going to talk about throughout the talk. And Monica and Paul, established in their own rights, are here to offer insight, though, as the children of Solomon Bard. And this entire talk came about in thanks to the exhibition, University of Chicago's exhibition on their Hong Kong campus, and it's called Refugee and Renaissance Man, and we'll talk a little bit about the title hopefully later. Solomon Bard and his 60 years in Hong Kong. And again, the title alone is a lot to unpack. I have information outside about the exhibition, and I encourage everybody, if you've seen it, if you haven't seen it, to go see it. It's on, I think, through January 4th, is correct. Yeah, and I recommend you make a reservation. I went yesterday. I neglected to make a reservation. I missed that part. And I only got in because Ken was thankfully there at the same time, and I had to sort of talk my way in. So make reservations. Do go see it. And again, there's information outside on that. So again, we'll come back to the title, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about how the exhibition came to be. So maybe Kenneth, if you can start, Ken, can you start us off with that? A little bit about that, and were you familiar with Solomon Bard before? Or?
So, University of Chicago's Hong Kong campus opened in 2018, and we built on a historic site. And so, as part of the lease for the land, we were obligated to create a small museum to document the history of the site. The site has been a cemetery, a British military base, a detention center, a squatters colony, a clubhouse for the Royal Engineers, a film site, you name it. It's gone through a lot. And basically what happened was I was on the faculty oversight board, and when the university said, well, you know, we're going to hire some company to do the museum part, and looked at this company's stuff online. I wasn't all that impressed. And I said, no, look, we're an academic institution. We should do this in-house. And they said, congratulations, you're in charge. So I then spent the next couple of years of my life recreating the history of this site and doing the museum. In the process, that was when I first heard of Solomon Bard, because, as most of you probably know, he was a doctor and he was a medic with the British Volunteer Forces during World War II. And when Mount Davis was being heavily bombed, Bard was treating the wounded, and he was on our site, which is actually where he was when the British surrendered and the Japanese captured him. So there was a link to our site, and I kind of filed the name away, and then he kept popping up. He did so many other things, and since, in addition to the permanent collection, we're obligated over a period of 10 years to do 10 rotating exhibits, so I thought, this is an interesting guy, we should do something on him someday. And after our board initially said, no, not well enough, no, I was stubborn, and here we are.
So this is for Monica or Paul, or both of you actually. So when did you become involved in the exhibition, and sort of what was your role? I noticed that when I finally got into the exhibition yesterday, that probably the majority of the items were on loan from you, Monica. So what was your role, and how much input did both of you have?
Ken, I can't remember when we had that first Zoom meeting. Late spring, yes.
Adventurous Hemisphere.
There's two microphones.
I said it depends which hemisphere.
Oh, of course, right. April, let's call it.
Yeah. And I mean, it was out of the blue. But you must have just read it. You must have written to us, or
yes, Shannon gave me your contact information.
That's right. And you wrote, and I thought, a Chicago campus. in Hong Kong, what's going on? And they're wanting to do an exhibition about our father. You know, it took a while to grasp what was, what it was, you know. Is there some joke? But anyway, once we knew that, you know, Shannon and Dan Biederman were also kind of in on it, we fixed up a Zoom meeting and we discussed what would be useful for us to send.
So you had quite a bit of input from the beginning, right?
Yes, yes. So, you know, I got together all the stuff that I had, which unfortunately was all over the place. You know, it wasn't all in one place. I'm still discovering bits that might have been useful. So I got them together and I sent a list to Ken's, well, to Shannon actually.
Right,
Your
yes,
son,
right, the other Shannon.
Sue. Is it Sue?
Sue.
To discuss what would be of interest to send, and in fact most of it was. So I packed it off. Yeah. Paul, did you send stuff?
Actually, well, most of the things have your name on it.
There's another story
I
about.
sent a lot of photos.
Yes.
Yeah.
I did. I sent a lot of photos and vetted a lot of photos, but I had already, on our behalf, given stuff to the Hong Kong Museum of History, regrettably. I'd done that, so yeah, I wasn't in a position to give other objects, physical objects.
You should explain what the Museum of History were going to do.
What they said they were going to do.
Yeah.
They said,
Yeah,
they said they were going to create a permanent exhibition for 20 years about Far Eastern Jews and their contribution to Hong Kong.
Oh,
They're going to
we
focus
spoke with
on-
them as well, so
Right.
yeah.
Okay. So, and we're going to hopefully see them tomorrow. I'm not sure what will come out of that. We may not return. But, assuming we do, we might, you know, who knows. Anyway, they were going to create this exhibition for Far Eastern Jews, and one of the Kaduris, Elias Kaduri, was going to be one of the persons about whom the exhibition would report, and also my father, and one other person, I just can't remember. I have a feeling it might have been Harry Odell. I'm not sure about that.
I mean, it sounds like we probably
Yeah.
could.
Yeah, so there were three Jews from the 60s, 70s, particular 80s, who made contributions to the cultural, to the financial life of Hong Kong, the cultural life of Hong Kong, medical, musical. And Harry Odell was an impresario who brought many acts to Hong Kong, and so he was also part of it, I think part of the exhibit. I don't think the exhibit has ever proceeded, and I have stopped getting responses from my correspondents. So anyway, we've got some information about a contact at the museum, which we hope to explore tomorrow, and with some luck, we'll get in and have a chat. And maybe that museum, maybe that exhibition will eventuate.
Funny if they had contacted the Historical Society. I mean, like, this was years ago, and I met with them, and they had asked if they could have one of the pews from our synagogue. Of course, those are people's seats, right? So, and I didn't realize it was going to be for 20 years. I thought it was going to be a short-term exhibition. So I said no in any event. So they said they were going to recreate it, and they were going to recreate the whole interior of the synagogue. So we'll see. We'll see. Maybe it'll happen.
But there is, I mean, I've been to the Museum
Yeah.
of History beforehand, and there is already in there. My father had done it. He was part of the, he was involved in the establishment of the museum and in the curatorial parts of it. And so there are in the museum already parts of his uniforms and stuff that he had donated. So I thought, you know, what a great idea, giving them his sword, which there's nothing special about the sword. It's an officer's sword for an infantryman, just a sword he bought, but it was sentimental value. So giving him the sword was sort of a bit of an issue for me and Monica. But we did it, and it's probably in the archive somewhere.
Well, maybe after tomorrow you can bring that exhibition to light. Yeah.
Exactly. We'll
So,
report back.
Another thing I'm actually talking about, the current exhibition, Ken and I talked about this a little bit yesterday. When you're putting on an exhibition, there's always limitations, many limitations, but also just practical lens of time and space. So you can't really give the entirety of someone's life, especially a life, somebody, such a figure larger than life. But so I just am curious about what, if you were to, sort of have your wish list of what you would have liked to have included in the exhibition. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, so. And I mean, from all three of you, but I know that.
I mean, for me, aside from the obvious constraint that we've only got about 900 square feet, there's only so much you can do with that. For me, perhaps the most important constraint was that our exhibits have to be about Hong Kong, which means that there were parts not only of Solomon Bard's life, but of the whole family that it would be really interesting to talk about, that I just felt we couldn't justify. I became fascinated by his Uncle David, who has this amazing life. You know, he flees conscription into the Russian army, winds up in Aleppo and Beirut, making his living playing violin, in nightclubs mostly, until his sister more or less says to him, I don't like this. You know, this is a little too sleazy. You shouldn't be there. Come join the family in Harbin. And he does. And from there goes to Shanghai, when Harbin gets unpleasant after the Japanese take over. And it's a really interesting story in its own right, including, I mean, one story that I love, apparently, is that when Solomon was trying to make up his mind about a career, he was thinking about medicine, but he was also thinking about music. And it was Uncle David who apparently said to him, oh, you don't want a career in music, that's gonna die. Because this was 1932 and talkies had just come in. He said there's no future for orchestras anymore because we won't be playing the accompaniment to silent films. But, you know, really interesting person, really interesting story, and actually an interesting detail for this audience that I hadn't known is apparently all the nightclubs in the British Empire throughout Asia were all basically run by Baghdadi Jews. So there was this network, you know, from the Middle East to Calcutta to Hong Kong to the international settlement in China. Why were they all run by Baghdadi Jews? I have no idea, but apparently they were.
But the Baghdadi Jews were effectively expelled from Baghdad in the 1830s.
Right.
When the Sassoons, who were effectively the bankers to the Sultan for 500 years, fell out with the governor of Baghdad, and the Sultan decided not to support the Sassoons, so they had to flee. And with the Sassoons, the Kaduris and the Harduns all left, because they were the linchpin to the relationship between Jews and the Sultanate. So when they left, they went, initially they went, had a stopover, I think in, I'm not sure exactly when, I can't remember, but anyway, they ended up in India. Bashir. And then they ended up in India, and then from India they started exporting into China. Unfortunately, they made their money out of opium. And they made a lot of money out of opium when, after the Second Opium War, the British removed any obstacle to the export of opium or the import of opium into China for some reason. No one knows quite why. So the British East India Company, which had previously dominated the importation of opium, no longer had a dominant position. And the Sassoons, particularly the Kaduris as well, who used to work for the Sassoons and set up for their own, made a lot of money.
But of course, your father's journey here is very, very different from Nick's, right?
And you're talking about what would have been interesting to ignore
Yeah.
constraints. So when we went to the Museum of the War and Resistance and Coastal Defences Museum, which is also a fascinating museum. Really, I mean, my father did a lot of work on that too. He wrote a book on coastal defences of Hong Kong. But ignoring that, in that museum, there were items which I'd never seen. One was the program for a musical performance in the POW camp at Chim Sa Tsui. I've never seen the actual program, the cover and the which is called Bard Concert. And then there was a program of pieces of music that would be played, and ignoring the musical equipment they manufactured for that occasion. That was something that I thought would be great to have there. There's other information there in one section of the museum dealing with the Volunteers Defence Force, what they did in the defence of Hong Kong. Also very interesting stuff, includes involves my father to some extent, but a lot of other people there, so interesting stuff. And there's another thing which I actually gave to the Hong Kong Museum of History, which I really regret. Anyway, we gave, I should say. I don't want to accept personal responsibility for it. And it was a medal. It was the Anderson Medal, and it was named after Professor Anderson, who was a professor of medicine at Hong Kong University. And my father, having learned English in a year in Shanghai, then won the Anderson Medal for his studies at Hong Kong University. And Monica and I donated that medal to the Museum of History. I'd love to get that back. That is the target. We'll see about that. Anyway, that would have been great to have at the University of Chicago's
Yeah.
exhibition.
We asked for it, and they gave it to us.
Okay. So one thing actually, this is actually probably for you, Monica, because I know I mentioned this to you in an email, that when you go to the exhibition, and also when you read the memoir, Light and Shade, Sketches from an Uncommon Life by Solomon Matthew Bard, if you haven't seen this book, I suggest you get it. It was published by Hong Kong University Press in 2009, which is also when he gave the fireside chat for the JHS in conjunction with the publication and the launch. But when you read the book and you go to the exhibition, what's noticeably absent is really a lot of information about your mother. And I mean, I think that the little bit that's in here in a couple of photos, I think she's probably really remarkable woman in her own right. So for me, that's what I said that I'd like to know more about. So if you want to tell us a bit.
You'd like to know more about what she did when?
Yeah. I mean, because I think that she was really. I mean, she was very, very well accomplished. I think when you take the fact that she was a woman, the time period.
Yeah. I mean, she was
Jewish, stateless.
Yes, she was stateless. She was studying medicine at Hong Kong University, which is how my parents met. The war interrupted her medical studies, so she had not qualified. But during the war, she carried on doing medical work voluntarily at the Queen Mary Hospital, and also doing other voluntary work, which I think Paul in Sydney has the award. My mother was awarded something for her good works during a commendation, right, for what she did during the war. Certainly she was very busy taking food parcels over to the camp, which she knew that my father would share with everybody. And she would actually, and it's probably in the book, she would scribble tiny folded up notes written in Russian into, say, a little cake that we can't read because it's all in Russian, to my father. So she was extremely busy during the war. I mean, she was offered to be housed in a civilian camp, but she declined. She'd rather stay out and carry on doing some sort of work. Yes.
I was going to say, I think it's actually interesting too, because your father had become a naturalized British citizen,
He did,
I believe,
yes.
about the year before the war started,
Yes, yes, because he anticipated,
perhaps?
not only he, but the war was anticipated. He felt it was our war, and he wanted to fight. So he joined the volunteers, yeah.
Right, and your mother still was stateless at that
My
point,
mother was
which
still
was an advantage. She
stateless.
wasn't put into one of the camps.
That's right. It did prove to be an advantage, yeah. So after the war, as you know, they went back to, well, not back, but they went to England.
Right.
Yes, and she
Repatriated.
Yes.
Repatriated.
Yeah, I think he uses it in quotes when he says repatriated.
Yeah, repatriated back to,
Right.
to complete her medical studies, and she did, pursue a career, yeah.
Right, which I imagine, well, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, but I would think would be quite unusual
Yes,
in that
I
era
think
to
it
have a
was,
full-time
yeah.
career as a
Yeah.
physician.
Yes, yes.
Particularly maybe, well, you have to live as a Western.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly was. One thing that made it slightly less unusual maybe is that in China, medicine became a female profession earlier than it did in most of the West. So there would have been some female doctors around, both in Shanghai and in Hong Kong.
Actually, her paternal aunt was a doctor, and that's what inspired her to become a doctor. She was very, very fond of this aunt, who actually died prematurely, but yeah. So I think you're right, there were, and she was in Shanghai, so I think you're right.
And at, I think Judy Citron, Judy was the sister of Victor Zariski. I don't know if you know who Victor Zariski was, but at the time he was the honorary consul in Hong Kong. And Judy was his sister, and she married Walter Citron, and they lived in Tokyo. Actually, but anyway, before then, she was at Hong Kong University studying medicine as well. I don't think she ever practiced. I'm not sure she may have, but anyway, she was at Hong Kong. So there were two female students at Hong Kong University studying medicine. My mother at university was, according to my father, an outstanding tennis player, and scored the highest marks in chemistry ever known at the university. But he said the miracle was that she learned it by rote. She understood nothing. The entire book by rote, and scored the highest mark ever in chemistry.
There's a story about those exams that my father bet her that she would not get a perfect score, you know, I don't know what it was, the full score for her chemistry exam. And I think he bet her an enormous amount of chocolate. And she did. So she had to go and buy all this chocolate. Yeah. So she did study hard. As a daughter, I did probably as a son, you know, unfortunately, test results from school. What, you got 96? So what happened to the other 4? Yeah, what happened? I don't know if you got that, Paul. She was quite demanding. She was quite demanding. Yeah, she didn't quite understand how it was not possible to do it because it came quite easily to her.
Plus the bet.
Hmm?
Plus she had to win the bet. So
She had to win the bet.
one thing I was going to ask too, which I think one thing I was going to ask also, just really briefly though, which I think you touched on a bit, was whether they spoke Russian or English in your household. Because I know that you said you couldn't read Russian. That came out in a little bit for a second, but.
Oh, it's a big source of resentment. They spoke it to each other and to their Russian friends,
It's like a superpower.
and didn't teach us, they didn't speak to us in Russian at all.
They swore in Russian.
They swore in Russian.
Fluently.
That is absolutely true. I mean, later on, they didn't speak a lot of Russian to each other, even then. But certainly when I was a child, they did. And we were left out. The rationale was, well, we were already learning Cantonese and English, so we didn't need a third language. These days, people understand that children can learn many more.
Unless you're in the U.S. But actually, another thing too about sort of growing up, and another thing maybe Ken can comment on this as well, is I don't know, when I look at the life of Solomon Bonaparte, again, I'm speaking as the chair of the Jewish Historical Society and the Jewish Community Center, I would call this a Jewish story. So I want sort of all of your opinions about how much you think that's true, what surprised maybe you about what you learned about sort of his Jewish backgrounds, and then also sort of discussion about what growing up in the Jewish community was like for both of you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was a bit of a puzzle, because if you read Light and Shade, there's very little about his Judaism in there. And so I got the impression that it was not central to his life. But then when I interviewed the Biedermans and learned about the amount of time he spent volunteering at the Jewish Museum in Sydney, and obviously had a choice of volunteer activities, that made it clear that his Jewishness did matter, perhaps not so much in a religious way as in an ethnic way. I mean, it also, I don't want to shift the subject away from him, but for me, as the son of 2 Holocaust refugees, there was also a resonance. Part of what drew me to him is he was part of that enormous group of people who were blown all across the world between the 20s and the 50s. I mean, different catastrophe than my parents' catastrophe. catastrophe, but still, for me it resonated, and that is, not exclusively a Jewish story, but among other things, a Jewish story.
So yeah, maybe both of you, yeah, if you want to, so a little bit also maybe about whether you think it really is a Jewish story, and also about what your life was like as part of a Jewish community, if you were involved growing up.
Yes, I suppose our lives were rather divided between different communities. There was definitely the Jewish community that was really very important actually to us. It's where we made our Jewish friends, and because very few people had, a grandparent in Hong Kong or an aunt or uncle, any extended family. The families of the community, we were one another's extended family. So, we celebrated, the Jewish club was often, we often had Passover together, or Seder, broke the fast together, and certainly in my synagogue in London, they do have a communal Seder, but just on the one night. But it's not quite the same. People don't break the fast together. They do it in their families. And at first that was very strange to me. So that it was an important part of my childhood, being part of the Jewish club. We had a lot of fun here, played a lot of badminton. Purim was a big thing. We used to put on plays. I remember very happy times here, really. My mother, I don't know about my father, but my mother played bridge here and poker, so that was a regular phenomenon. How about you, Paul? You did your bar mitzvah.
I don't know about Dad's Jewishness, but I think he was very Jewish because he was certainly ethnically Jewish.
Yeah.
He sent me to a Presbyterian boarding school, so that says a lot about what he thought about going to a Jewish school. But but he was a man of great foresight, because he made this decision in 1963, and he made the decision because he had forecast in 63, much to everyone else's disagreement, that 97 was the end of Hong Kong as a British colony. End of Hong Kong. Didn't matter what anyone said. There's no way China would stand by and allow the British to occupy Hong Kong, full stop. So he was quite, a way ahead of his time. Obviously, other people thought that, but he was quite clear about it. And so getting a foothold in another country was, for him, important for us to have. So Australia was the destination. On my mother's side, we had quite a few relatives there. And on my father's side, actually, relatives in Melbourne, but fortunately he didn't send me to Melbourne, he sent me to Sydney. I think the Jewish club was in our youth, it was very important. Badminton was a tennis court here. I don't think I ever saw anyone use it. There was a tennis court there, and there was an oval, there was a lawn area, and it was a really beautiful spot in a colony that wasn't quite as developed as it is today. But where people actually could have a view occasionally of the harbour, which is all gone. But it was a great place. It was a meeting place, but it was a much smaller community as well. And a much smaller community. 3,000 is relatively to what we had then, a lot bigger. I think we were 300, maybe 500.
200 families, I always heard.
Families.
200 families.
Anyway, whatever. It was a much smaller community than it is today, and so everyone sort of knew everyone. It was a different environment, and then, so we were here every week. I think we had religious instruction every week. There was always them playing after that. And actually going out to the Jewish club was a big thing for us, going out and having a feed at the club, and being treated like being ordeal food or ordeal soft drink. It was a big thing for kids, so it was great fun, really good fun. And Tim was part of that. He's here today, so I think that it was fun times.
Oh, no.
So no, I was just going to say that. So one thing you talked about a lot about how in '97 when he thought that really Hong Kong was things were going to turn here, right away he made sure that you had another place to go. So that seems to obviously be a pattern in his life, right? We have followed from Chita to Harbin to Shanghai to Hong Kong, then to the UK, back to Hong Kong. So again, it goes to sort of the title of the exhibition, and I want to talk a little bit about that. I mean, he was so many things, and the fact that, the exhibition's titled Renaissance Refugee and Renaissance Man. So I want to talk a little about what that means and why those were sort of the two sort of titles.
So to start with the easier one, I mean, he's clearly a Renaissance man, both in the obvious sense of the term, right? Somebody who was good at a great many things.
I'm not sure if everyone knows exactly, maybe a little
Okay, so by profession, he's a doctor, highly skilled musician who also played an important role in the founding of what is now the Hong Kong Philharmonic. Then later also played a role in the founding of the Hong Kong Chinese Orchestra and was the only non-Chinese member of it for quite a while. Also played an important role in the creation of the Antiquities and Monuments Organization, was a more or less self-trained archaeologist, and was part of an early group that really helped create historic preservation laws in Hong Kong when it didn't have any. Also part of the group that lobbied very hard for the building of what is now the City Hall after World War II. The old City Hall had been demolished in the 30s. The British had promised to build a new one, and then with the Depression and the war and so forth, it kept not happening. And so people kind of got together to push them. Sure, I forgot. So, well, a historian, I mean, the author of books about the history of Hong Kong, just did an awful lot of things. So that Renaissance man is kind of easy in that sense. The second meaning of it, which for any of you who come to the talk tomorrow I'll talk about more, is the more I thought about Bard's career here, the more I began to see him as part of a group of people who in the immediate post-war period really recreated Hong Kong. And in particular, I think in some ways in lieu of decolonization, which obviously wasn't going to happen in Hong Kong in the same way that happened in places that turned into nation states. But in lieu of that, there was a real effort to sort of build Hong Kong culturally, right? You see the foundation of the Hong Kong Philharmonic, the Performing Arts Academy, the Visual Arts Academy, Hong Kong University Press, a little bit later CUHK. I mean, there's just a lot of that stuff that's all coming out of, I think, people who after the big war said, something's got to give. It's also the period in which a lot of the segregation ordinances were repealed, right? And so in some ways it's Hong Kong's non-political decolonization, it's part of that. And I think of that as a renaissance. And then Refugee, well, they fled the Russian Revolution, they fled the Japanese takeover of Manchuria, and then, well, they always planned to leave Shanghai, but Uncle David, for instance, didn't plan to leave Shanghai and winds up staying until the Chinese Revolution. It's a theme.
That's right. He planned to leave Shanghai to come here to study, but I think the families were not planning to leave Shanghai, and the Chinese Revolution and the aftermath of that forced them to leave again. So I think in that sense it's a Jewish story, right? Maybe it's not only a Jewish story. I mean, other cultures have similar experiences. It's not uniquely, but I think in many ways it is. It's really interesting because I think my father would have been enormously flattered to be called a Renaissance man. He would have said, well, I'm jack of all trades and master of none. That's what he would have said, and he often did. So he would have been flattered.
What would you have made of the whole exhibition?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. He would have been very honored.
Yeah.
It would, as we are.
you have any sense of if you were to ask him what he would have said his greatest accomplishments? Again, I mean, Ken rattled off, right? I mean, how many accomplishments? So if you're willing to say.
Oh gosh.
Maybe there isn't.
I think he was really proud of what he did with the AMO, the Antiquities and Monuments. Because I remember when he was asked to start that up and become the first chair of that board, and he was really quite unsure about whether he would be able to manage it. It was quite a huge task, and he didn't only want to be an administrator, he wanted to go out and find the antiquities and that needed preserving. And he confided in me quite a lot at that time, and he really had a lot of self-doubt. So, but in the end, it was a great success. So I think he would have been extremely proud of that. I think he also, writing the books, were a huge thing. He really, I think those were a great achievement too. What do you think, Paul?
I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. I would have thought Hong Kong Philharmonic was his. I think he would have thought that was his greatest achievement because he worked on it for 2 decades to get the money and to get the talent. And I think that was the culmination of many years of effort. Started with an orchestra of 15 members. And I'm not saying the other. It's very difficult to say which one in hindsight, but if I had to pick one, I'd pick the Hong Kong Philharmonic.
Your sense?
I don't know. I mean, my gut is with Paul that it would have been the Philharmonic, but I don't know. I did want to add one thing about the AMO, which is quite interesting, because Bard did get some criticism for the way he handled that. But it was interesting because I think it's the kind of thing where he's clearly been vindicated, and I think it says something about him and about Hong Kong, because what he was criticized for is putting the emphasis on Chinese sites rather than European-style British colonial architecture. And of course, the best organized and most vocal and wealthiest part of the community had a particular interest in the European-style colonial buildings, and was pushing him to prioritize those. And he quite clearly said, no, that's, we'll do some of that. But our first priority should be things like temples out in the new territories where the local communities doesn't have the money to preserve this themselves. And I think, given the complicated history of race relations and so forth in the city, A, he's clearly been vindicated, and B, it's something to really be proud of. Because not everybody in the British community would have made that move.
Well, it sounds like, his experiences are so much broader than just the British community. So I guess maybe he's looking at some points as an insider and some points as an outsider, I suppose. But his travels, his interest in archaeology took you well beyond Hong Kong as well, right? You had quite a few travels, if you want to talk about.
It took him?
Yeah. I think you traveled as well.
You mean like to Easter Island?
Yeah.
No. He did all that on his own. He went all over Turkey. Yeah, because he had what was called, he was employed on expat terms at the university. And so he was entitled to several months of home leave every so often. And he because my mother was in private practice as a sole practitioner and didn't have anyone really to look after her practice. She was a gynecologist and obstetrician, so you have to be around sometimes. So we didn't go, except for once when we went on a family holiday And I was 15. And, but I don't remember it as being a particularly archaeological, except in Israel.
Right, because I was going to say there's quite a few pictures.
Except in Israel,
Many times.
and we did go around Siberia and many other sites, Masada, of course. But in Italy, I think it was just a lovely family holiday. Yes. But we did go around with him locally, you know, to all sorts of islands and Chimawan and all sorts of places. We went on quite a few, well, whenever you went on any outing with my dad, he would have his trowel and he'd be digging around, right? There was an incident with you, but I think it's important, about how you discovered something and,
Yeah, well, there's a,
and you didn't realise what it was.
no, I knew what it was, but I didn't realise that I discovered it. And I'm sure I didn't discover it. I'm sure he put it there. I was not focusing and doing something else. He just put it there and said, "Look what you found." It's an ants. Sure, I found an ants. It was the only ants I found in 10 years of going on to Lantau and Lama Island with him looking for answers. We were willing, but you know, I mean, when you're on a weekend and you're kids and you're on the university campus and you've got several of your friends running around the campus and you're given a choice, I would have gone with my friends every time. But I wasn't given the choice. So yeah, it was great fun. But it was look, we had a great time. We used to go to Chimawan, which was an island on sort of
No, it's
Lantau.
not Lantau.
Yeah, Lantau, but we used to go there, we go hiking there and looking for answers and things like that. And, or pottery was another big thing, and
Yeah.
identifying sites where you could set up sites for archaeological expeditions on Tayo and other places like that. So it was really very exciting, but yeah. We didn't go overseas with him. He did go overseas. In fact, he went to Siberia, and he met the archaeologist who was one of the
Rick.
yeah, a good friend of his. So that was a very exciting time for him. He was there at the early days of the discovery, and so that was very exciting. And I don't remember.
We weren't there.
No, but did he go? Where else did he go there? On archaeological digs. He was always communicating with the archaeologists and learning about archaeology and studying it, because he actually lectured at the university in archaeology.
He went to the Orkneys.
Just a footnote there. If you go through the minutes of the early days of what is now the Antiquities and Monuments Organization, they were looking for models for legislation on preserving antiquities. And the two models that Bard brought to them were Australia and Palestine/Israel, right? I mean, both places he knew for different reasons, but also places that had indigenous pasts to preserve and that had a British administrative tradition that made it easy to transfer to Hong Kong.
So, I mean, I have other questions that I can ask, but we have about 15 minutes before the hour, so I want to give everybody an opportunity to ask questions if they'd like. So, does anybody have questions? Or maybe I'll.
How did your mother get to Hong Kong?
Walked.
That's a long way.
She was born in Harbin.
Yes, she got. Do you want to? She was originally, she was studying at Shanghai University, but she was dating a non-Jewish guy.
This is not in the book.
And her parents weren't having any of it. So they somehow bundled her off to Hong Kong and put pay to that relationship. Poor mum. Although I wouldn't be here. Yeah. Well, she, her parents were pretty strong.
Yeah, very.
Yeah.
That's another Jewish aspect to the story. So,
She actually she studied at an English-speaking school in Shanghai, so she didn't have the language issue that my father had. So she went to, I think it was called Mackenzie or something like that, some Scottish name, Mackenzie School for Girls or something like that. I went to the school. We think it's the right school. Anyway, but she learned, so she matriculated in English and therefore could go to Hong Kong University. Whereas my father, our father, had to learn English, so he matriculated out of a Russian school in Harbin at about age 15, I think, and then went to Shanghai to learn English. He and several other Russian boys there, and they all learned English in a year, matriculated into Hong Kong University, and they all did very well. But my father's, got the university medal, the Anderson Medal for Medicine. So Mum didn't have that same problem. She was quite fluent in English, probably having studied in English school.
And he learned rather quickly, your father. Your father learned English rather quickly after the
Well, he
examinations.
didn't have to deal with Facebook and television.
Any other questions?
So, Ken, at the start of the talk, you said something very interesting. That you said that the university just wasn't interested in doing anything about sewing, which I find accurate and sad. That today, young people don't know who he was. They didn't know who Harry Odell was until a few years ago when a movie was made about him. They don't know who Arrigo Foa was, who was a very good friend of your father, or Siggy Sharfstein Rambler, who was your father's partner. So all these people who were very key in this period that you talked about, like after the war, to developing Hong Kong, are now forgotten. And it's quite sad, I think. So I'm happy that you're doing this exhibit. Who is coming? Are young people coming?
Some are. I don't have a list. If you go to the exhibit, you'll see that some of it is set up to try to lure in younger people. So, for instance, on a previous exhibit we found that these little things where there's a question on a board, and you can pick up the thing for the answer.
It's like interactive.
And this was a big hit with the school children who came to that exhibit. So we decided to do that again. I haven't seen any statistics on who's coming. And I should probably explain. So I designed the exhibit basically, but I did that in the spring and summer. Went back to Chicago to teach for the fall term, and only got back to Hong Kong a few days ago. So I have not been tracking who's been coming since the exhibit opened in October, except insofar as the staff tells me. I should say it wasn't quite that the university wasn't interested. It was, well, I guess what confirms your point is that our advisory board, when I mentioned Bard, said, no, we don't see a big audience for that. And I'm stubborn, so I said, no, but I think it's worthwhile. So get as many people as you can to come and persuade them.
And you'll be vindicated.
Right.
I mean, Howard, to follow up on your question, I mean, I think that the children here don't learn Hong Kong history generally, so we're getting this period. But I will say that Carmel School is going on Friday, the high school is going, so. So any other questions? Sorry.
No, Erica, you may want to mention that the links that are on the table in front of, if any people want to know about the exhibition.
Oh, yeah, I said at the beginning, that the cards are outside. Does any questions?
Where is it?
University of Chicago,
Yeah.
Victoria Road.
168 Victoria Road. 168 Victoria Road. There's a link on the website to reserve and tell them that you're coming, which is a good idea.
There should be more outside, but I have a few more. There should be outside. So we have a question back.
Can you speak a little bit to the role of music growing up in your lives? What was your home like in terms of music?
It was very, very important. I remember music being played all the time. And my father introduced me to classical music. He had quite a big record collection, and do you remember that he saved up and bought this rather expensive hi-fi, which I wasn't allowed to use, but we weren't allowed to use. But when they went out in the evening, I did. And I used to put on the records and probably scratched a few. But I learned the piano. Paul learned violin and piano for a while. And what was really lovely was, for a while, when I was good enough, I was able to accompany my father, violin and piano, Mozart's sonatas, nothing too difficult. But it was a really important part of our lives. And I used to go to, as you said, Harry O'Dell used to bring, really good artists into Hong Kong. I don't know if he was the only impresario, but I remember going to phenomenal concerts, mostly with my father. So I would say it was hugely important. He used to also get involved in conducting orchestra for choral concerts. And whenever I'd be around in the holidays long enough, I would join a choir and sing with them. So I don't know if that answers your question. I don't remember musical. Did we have musical soirees at home? I'm not so sure.
Dad was always practicing in his
Yeah.
mezzanine study.
Yeah.
Always here.
He was always practicing. And on the front desk with him in the orchestra was someone called Moya Ray, who was a very good pianist as well. And she was my piano teacher. And so she'd let me turn pages for her when she gave recitals. So that was pretty exciting.
It's all right, don't need it. So where did you as a family live? Were you in university accommodation? Did you live in somewhere like Felix Villas for a while? Or and when he ceased to be teaching at the university or running the university medical service, where did you live and what was it like there then?
We initially lived in Kowloon, in an apartment, China Light and Power, Courtyard, St George's Mansions, that's right, Argyle Street. I think the Kaduris found us that flat because accommodation was extremely scarce. Yes. Did you say it was 1955 when my father was employed by the university? We moved onto the campus, right onto the campus. There's no trace of it now. We moved into one of these wonderful colonial houses with verandas and so on.
Number 7.
Number 7, yeah.
The second what?
And then number 4.
Number 4.
Yeah.
What?
University Park.
University Path.
University Park.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes. No trace anymore. And when
But it was on the residential campus that doesn't exist. So there were 3 halls, one of which is left, I think. There was Lugard, Morrison and Elliot. Lugard, Morrison and Elliot. And the 3 halls were up the hill. We were on a path that was just, if you walk towards the halls to the left. And that was our second accommodation. That was number 4. And we were there till 76. So we were there from, in the first place, only for 2 or 3 years in number 7, and then they moved us to number 4. I don't know why we moved to number 4, but it was much better for us because it was amongst more kids, so it was fantastic. And yeah, and it was a beautiful home. It's a huge properties, and with servants' quarters out the back, and then there was a whole university residential campus where there was grass and fish pond and other kids and you know, places where you could run around and do a lot of damage at night. So it was very fun.
And then,
Pardon?
and then,
we, after the university, my parents bought an apartment in a building called Olympian Mansions at number 9 Conductor Road. I think it was the second or third floor. I don't know. Yeah, second or third floor. So there was on 9 Conductor Road anyway, Olympian Mansions, and they had a view for a year or two. And yeah, it was a lovely apartment too. It was really lovely. And then they sold that when they moved to Australia.
So
Yeah. In fact, they sold it just after they moved, I think, because they actually had a visa which they kept postponing until they were told, use it or lose it. And so initially, my mother was the one who didn't want to go, and my father said, no, we've got to go. And then when he convinced her that we had to go, he said, well, wait a minute, I'm just not sure I want to go just now. Because he was always concerned that he'd be bored if he went. He'd lose all this work that he was doing here. And in fact, none of it went away because they all contacted him in Sydney and said, we want you to do more work. So they kept sending work over, and he would fly back occasionally and continue working for the Hong Kong Museum and then doing work for the Hong Kong Museum of History, the Coastal Museum, etc. So none of it stopped, really. It all just kept him very busy right to the end. Yeah. So from Olympian Mansions, they sold that, then they moved into an apartment in an area called Darling Point in Sydney, which is very close to where we live now. And then my parents, my mother felt she developed Alzheimer's disease when she probably actually had it at the time when she just finished practicing in 76, when she was age 76 actually, and that was 92, 93. And she probably had some mini strokes, and she never recovered in the sense that it declined as it does in stages, and eventually she went to a facility that cares for Alzheimer's patients. And my father, we said to my father, we were selling on a terrace, and we said, my wife very kindly said, look, let's get your father and live together. And so we found a very large house, and it was a 2-story house. So we set it up as a duplex, basically. And so it was fantastic. So for 14 years we lived together in this house. And yeah, and that was in an area called Wallara, which is famous in the last 2 weeks because we've had people who apparently oppose the PKK, but spray painting cars with anti-Israel slogans and setting a light to a couple of cars as well. And hopefully, they've caught one of them already, but hopefully they get the other two and deal with it. But yeah. So it was really, it was a great, great period because we had him next door to us basically, and so we shared the backyard together. The designs that are here, there's own private entrance. If you wanted it, if you didn't want it, you could come in through the back, and which we all shared together with all the grandkids running around, annoying him.
So I think we're nearly out of time, but if there's one more question, I'll give time for one more question.
Thanks, that's fascinating. I want to follow up on the music, Hong Kong Phil in particular. You mentioned you didn't get an enthusiastic response of the interest in the exhibit. Does the Hong Kong Phil and the music community help promote your father, given how important he was? I was looking on the web and seeing there was some when he passed away, but do they still do that? I mean, it would seem to be, that would be the obvious area, one of those obvious areas where we could promote them. Do you still have a connection with them?
The Hong Kong Chinese Orchestra were very good, and they invited him back for their 30th anniversary, and he conducted part of that concert, and we were all present for that, and so that was a great occasion. But otherwise, no, I think they give you some information.
They gave us access to their archives, including their photo archives, which was very nice. And they did promise to promote our exhibit to their mailing list. They would not promote the concert because it's opposite a concert of theirs. And so they said, sorry, we just can't do that. But no, they've been reasonably helpful. Big bureaucratic organization, but they've,
Could have been more proactive. I would thought apart from that.
they've, you know, they've been reasonably helpful to us.
So anyway, thank you all three of you really for doing this and for giving us a little bit of an insight into a really remarkable life. Again, see the exhibition, the information's outside, and also the book, it's through Hong Kong University Press, and I highly recommend it. He has other books as well that be published. And this is just a small token of appreciation for the Historical Society, so I have one for each of you, a very small token. So, but really, thank you. It's really our pleasure to host you all. So, thank you.